Why are Nintendo reluctant to publicize or publicly credit development teams ahead of the credits being revealed? Even though most people instantly thought that Super Mario Odyssey developers EPD8 were behind the luscious looking, playful, and ambitious Donkey Kong Bonanza, it was only a few weeks before the game's release that this was confirmed. Sometimes Nintendo have been even more secretive. To learn the development teams behind Princess Peach Showtime and Mario and Luigi Brothership, we had to wait for the credits to basically drop. Neither exactly feel like state secrets of a massive scale, so why are Nintendo so, well, Nintendo about this kind of thing? And what do the few times when they've gone quite against this approach actually tell us? So first up, I think there are several key reasons why this approach makes sense for them. First of all, leak prevention and staff protection. These days, information is highly porous. We know details about specific hirings from different studios, many of those people have social media posts, and so on. The more public this kind of information is, the more it exposes their staff to unwanted attention, either being dragooned for information or else targeted for hacking, or in worst case scenarios, even potentially abused if games do a Metroid Prime 4 and don't show up for years and years. Nintendo are highly protective of their game developers, and rightly so, and I think building a wall around these studios has a pragmatic purpose. It also allows Nintendo to ensure that credit goes to Nintendo themselves primarily. They don't really want people thinking of titles as Acquire titles or Camelot titles or even EPD5 titles or what have you, but rather all part of the broad stable of Nintendo games. For one thing, in the case of third-party subcontractors, they really don't want some of them turning around in negotiations with Nintendo and asking for more money because they are getting individual plaudits for their work. Moreover, it's usually truer to credit Nintendo because even where there are large groups of developers from another team, it's Nintendo's own EPD staff who tend to have the final say and broad control over the direction of the various Nintendo projects. Finally, I think it's significant because they want to inculcate a we, not I, team approach in their games. Yes, some teams, more by accident than design, have a quite distinct feel. The Tokyo team is out on a limb and has reportedly in the past felt like a younger, more swashbuckling group, but generally speaking, it's in Nintendo's interests to emphasize cohesion, and of course, there are many cases where figures at every level cross between game franchises. I've mentioned a couple of times recently the example of Shiro Mori going from the Zelda team to direct Super Mario Bros. Wonder, while Takahiro Dota has had projects as diverse as the Zelda games, Ring Fit Adventure, and the Switch 2 itself. It struck me that Krista Yang recently said in one of the Kit and Krista podcasts about the game developers being quite siloed at Nintendo, and I think this is something that Nintendo will want to try to overcome as far as possible. Furthermore, Nintendo relies on its hits to subsidize its misses. This works as long as everyone feels part of one huge team. But if it's EPD9, the Mario Kart team who perceive themselves as supplying all the hits, while a different team are providing all the misses, that might create a negative atmosphere. Nintendo's developers are well remunerated by all accounts, but creating a sense of who deserves it more could quickly become quite toxic. Even the perception of some people receiving credits could be divisive, and so by limiting the number of people even interviewed to the very senior members of the team, usually the very top producers, it obviates this source of criticism from people being attracted to the interests of having smaller developers being interviewed. It allows the game developers to focus on making games and not trying to make names for themselves as media performers, whether they wish to or not. Now, there are times when Nintendo do take a different approach, and this is where there is a very specific publicity value for making an early disclosure. I can think of two times when they have done this in a significant way. In 2019, Nintendo explicitly confirmed that Retro Studios would be returning to develop Metroid Prime 4. This was a very unusual announcement, but it came in very unusual circumstances. I'm fairly sure that Nintendo felt obliged to tease the coming of Metroid Prime 4 back in 2017, only because they were still relatively short on big hitters for the Nintendo Switch, and alongside this, they were going to announce a major new 3DS Metroid, which had the distinction of being both an absolutely excellent remake of a classic that deserved a lot of respect, but also following Metroid Prime Federation Force, which risked therefore being crucified in a similar manner for not being a new mainline entry. Therefore, I think 2017's announcement, a commission I rather suspect they only felt able to make after the early success of the Switch made them feel that they had ducked another Wii U debacle. After all, I love Metroid Prime, I really do, but it's not a game that they keep in a glass case that says break glass in case of requiring massive sales. By 2019, though, and especially early in 2019, the company had pulled itself through a lean year, had a brief stock price dip in mid 2018 when it seemed that the company was lacking new stuff to show, and now had to announce the cancellation of a fan favourite game, albeit one they were rebooting. Invoking Retro's name was very much a way to assuage the fan base that this would be, in the long term, a positive move, and this in turn guaranteed a generally strongly positive response from the gaming press, which turned a sow's ear into a silk purse and thereby avoided negative headlines that the Switch could barely afford at that point when it was successful insofar as it went, but the system's shimmering destiny had yet to be fully confirmed. The other recent time, of course, was not actually naming a studio, but naming an individual. That's when they confirmed that Kirby Air Riders was the development project of Masahiro Sakurai himself. In this case, I rather suspect that even had they not seen huge value in using the Sakurai name to draw attention to the project, they basically had to confirm it because otherwise the question would dominate all other discussion for months as to whether or not a sequel to a previous Sakurai game was indeed a Sakurai title. Also, Masahiro Sakurai himself is very comfortable with doing press of this sort and has himself teased new projects, so I think he is given a degree of latitude that other developers may not be afforded. He is not a shy person unused to the limelight that has been reluctantly pushed forward, but has his own significant media presence, and so is likely to have wanted his name to be attached, something Nintendo would have no issue in granting anyway, given the immense respect with which they hold the man both in the industry and within the company itself. I suppose a third example here is indeed the Donkey Kong Bonanza developer reveal at this point of the previews for the game going out, but let's face it, this again was probably to stop speculation taking over all discussions, as well as because they knew that further promotional opportunities would require the key figures from EPT8 to get more closely involved, so it's not going to be a secret that it benefited them to keep any longer. Nintendo isn't completely coy about its development staff, of course. Their Ask the Developer interviews usually do give specific details as to who is behind the games. The credits mostly contain this information, although there are some Japanese studios that essentially do ghost work uncredited, and in the case of third-party collaborations, such as with Velan for Mario Kart Live Home Circuit and AAA Studios for Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, the teams were given particular billing, probably as a negotiated outcome of their development deals. There also seems to be a good deal of variety between the teams as to how stratified their organizations are. The Mario 3D team credits can be a bit of a pain for someone like me, as they often like to go down the route of having all the staff listed with no specific credits identifying their job roles. This is an impressively egalitarian approach to game making, but makes forecasting trickier, something I dare say that Shuntaro Furukawa is just cut up about. So, can we expect Nintendo to loosen up and start publicising their teams more? In a word, no. In fact, while there's a sense that we know a lot of Nintendo developers, this is often because they've been around Nintendo for a long time and during a period where Nintendo as a company hadn't figured out better ways of communicating in a corporate manner, and where their products were smaller selling and received less attention overall. Even back in the 1990s, a few people like Miyamoto and Aonuma would shoulder a lot of the discussion for a range of games, but now Nintendo is bigger, its development slate is more diverse, and the market consequences for anybody saying the wrong thing in an interview are all the greater. It's not a surprise that they've systematized all this, and all things considered, I can't blame them for doing so. That's not to say that I wouldn't love more behind the scenes information to be revealed, but for that I have to be grateful for the endless glories of the continuing developer interview series, which I'm delighted to say seems to be continuing. Thank you as ever for being here, and if you'd like to support the channel, please do check out the Patreon, but otherwise I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.